My brother demanded a DNA test to cut me out of Dad's will, but when the lawyer opened the results, he froze and looked straight at him. I spent 18 years being told I didn't belong. My stepmother, Diane, had a way of doing it that was almost elegant. She never had to scream. She never had to throw things. She could destroy me across a dinner table with sterling silver forks lined up beside bone china plates. Everything perfect, everything polished, everything calculated. She would look at me for a little too long, then turn to my father and say, "Just loud enough for everyone to hear? It's strange, William. He looks nothing like you." My brother Preston would laugh every time. It was a sharp, barking laugh that made my shoulders tighten before I even realized I was bracing for it. "Maybe he's not even really your son," he would say. "Maybe his mom had a thing with the mailman. My real mother died when I was 3. Cancer took her before I was old enough to remember her face clearly. All I had left of her was the memory of her perfume, something soft and floral that seemed to disappear from the house the day Diane moved in. For 18 years, I believed them. I believed every sideways glance, every cruel joke, every carefully placed doubt. So when my dad died last month, and Preston stood up during the will reading demanding that I take a DNA test to prove I deserved any part of the estate, I was not surprised. What surprised me was what happened when the lawyer opened the envelope. He didn't look at me. He looked at Preston. "My name is Ethan Carmichael. I'm 34 years old, a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Clark in Boston. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Beacon Hill, drive a 7-year-old Subaru with rust spots on the bumper and a crack in the windshield, and I hadn't spoken to anyone in my father's house since I was 17. That was when I left. Senior year of high school, 2-something in the morning, I packed a duffel bag, walked out the front door of the Carmichael estate, and never looked back. I found out Dad had died through an email. Not a phone call. Not even a text. An email from his attorney, Lawrence Rothstein, informing me that William Carmichael had passed away from a stroke on November 8th, and that my presence was required at the reading of his will. The email was formal and cold, like I was a business associate being summoned to a closing, not his son being told his father was dead. I stared at it for 3 hours before I replied. The Carmichael estate sat on 12 acres in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Georgian brick, white columns, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center. It was the kind of house that appeared in magazines, under headlines like New England Elegance. When I pulled up in my Subaru, I felt like I had ridden a bicycle into a Bentley convention. Diane was standing at the front window when I arrived. There was no grief on her face, only anxiety, the kind people wear when they are bracing for impact. The house was already full of relatives I barely recognized, second cousins, business partners, old family friends, and people who whispered as I walked past. Only here for the money. 17 years, not one visit. Some son. Preston stood in the center of the room wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled, a Rolex shining on his wrist, every inch the golden child this family had always believed he was. He saw me and smiled. It was not friendly. It was victorious. "Ethan," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Glad you could make it." I nodded. I did not shake his hand. Lawrence Rothstein appeared in the doorway a few minutes later. He was in his mid-60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful posture of a man who had spent 37 years practicing estate law and had seen families tear themselves apart in quiet, expensive rooms. According to the plaque in his office, he specialized in probate, trusts, and estate disputes. He asked everyone to follow him into the library. We filed into the same library where Dad used to read to me when I was little. Before Diane, before Preston, before everything in that house turned cold. I took a seat in the back. Preston and Diane sat front row center, like they were attending a Broadway show, and expected the ending to be exactly what they had paid for. Lawrence cleared his throat. "Before we begin, there is a matter that must be addressed." Preston stood before Lawrence could continue. "Actually, Lawrence, I have something to say first." He turned to face the room. 32 people stared back at him. He knew exactly what he was doing. "My father's will states that his estate will be divided among his biological children," Preston said, then looked directly at me. "But there has been speculation for years about whether Ethan is actually Dad's son." A ripple moved through the room. Murmurs, whispers, a few sharp inhales. I sat still and felt every eye turn toward me. Preston kept going. "In the interest of fairness and legal clarity, I think Ethan should take a DNA test to prove he is biologically related to William Carmichael." The room erupted. Voices overlapped from every direction. "That's ridiculous." "Actually, that's reasonable. This is about money, not family. It should have been done years ago." Diane stood beside Preston, her face arranged into a mask of reluctant concern. I hate to say this, she said, which meant she had been waiting years to say it. But I've always had doubts. William's first wife had a complicated past. It's only responsible to verify. My hands clenched around the armrests of my chair. For a second, I was 17 again, sitting at that dinner table while they tore pieces off me with smiles on their faces. Then something inside me went very quiet. Fine, I said. The room went silent. I stood. I'll take the test. But the will says biological children. So to be completely fair, shouldn't everyone claiming inheritance be tested? Preston laughed. Fine by me. I've got nothing to hide. But Diane's face changed for just 1 second. It was quick, almost invisible, but I saw it. Fear. The next week felt like drowning in slow motion. Lawrence arranged the DNA testing through Gene Tech Labs, a certified facility in Cambridge. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a forensic DNA specialist with 23 years of experience, oversaw the process personally. Her office was all clinical white walls, humming refrigeration units, microscopes, sealed kits, and the kind of cleanliness that made every breath feel too loud. We'll need samples from both of you, Dr. Morrison explained. Cheek swabs. It's a simple procedure. We'll compare your DNA to William Carmichael's medical records. Results should take 5 to 7 days. Preston went first. He was confident, smiling as if he were getting his teeth cleaned before a photo shoot. I went second. My hand shook when Dr. Morrison swabbed the inside of my cheek. She noticed. Nervous? She asked. Wouldn't you be? I said. She sealed the sample. Results don't lie. Whatever the truth is, you'll have clarity. Clarity. As if clarity could fix 18 years of being told I did not belong. I did not stay at the house. I could not stomach sleeping under that roof. Not with Diane walking those halls, and Preston enjoying the performance of my humiliation. I stayed at the Courtyard Marriott near Wellesley because it was what I could afford. The next day, Preston texted me, Dad's funeral is Thursday, 11 a.m. Street Paul's Church. Try to look respectable. I showed up in my only suit, a navy blue one from Macy's that I had bought for job interviews 3 years earlier. Street Paul's was packed, 400 people, maybe more. Senators, CEOs, federal judges, people who had known my father as a businessman, a donor, a host, a name on buildings, a man of wealth and influence. An usher met me at the door. Ethan Carmichael. He checked his clipboard. You're in Section C, back row. Behind distant cousins I had met twice. Behind Dad's business partners. Behind people who did not even know him as anything more than a signature on a check. The funeral program listed family members in elegant calligraphy. Wife, Diane Carmichael. Son, Preston Carmichael. Other relatives, Ethan Carmichael. Not son, not family, other. Preston gave the first eulogy. He talked about Dad's business empire, his philanthropy, his discipline, his devotion to family. My father taught me everything, he said, voice trembling. How to negotiate. How to lead. How to be a man. He choked up. Real tears, maybe. Or maybe Preston was just that good at performing. Diane gave the second eulogy. She wore black Prada, pearls, and a hat with a veil. William was my rock, she said. My partner. The love of my life. Our son Preston was his greatest pride. She never said my name. Not once. After the service, I stood alone near the exit, while everyone else drifted toward the reception hall. Shrimp cocktails, champagne, soft laughter that felt obscene with my father's body barely in the ground. Then the housekeeper found me. Rosa Martinez was 63 years old and had worked for my father since before I was born. She approached me like she was afraid someone might see. Mr. Ethan, she whispered. She pressed something cold and small into my hand. A key. Third floor study. The locked one. He wanted you to see it. I looked down at the key, then back at her. What is this? Rosa's eyes were wet. The key, she said. And the truth. I waited until 1 in the morning. Everyone had left. The house was dark except for the security lights outside and the faint glow from the foyer. I entered quietly and climbed to the 3rd floor with the key Rosa had given me. The 3rd floor study had been locked for as long as I could remember. Dad's private office. Off limits. A room, Diane said, I had no reason to enter. The key slid into the lock. The door opened with a soft click. I turned on the lights. The walls were covered with photographs of me. Hundreds of them. Professional surveillance photos. Me walking to work in Boston. Me standing in line at a coffee shop. Me outside Morrison and Clark's office building. Me carrying groceries outside my apartment. Me crossing Beacon Street in the rain. Me laughing at something on my phone. Me living a life I thought my father had chosen not to care about. The photos went back years. My father had been watching my entire adult life from a distance. On the desk was a folder labeled confidential. My hands felt numb before I even opened it. Inside was a DNA test, dated 12 years earlier. Preston Carmichael. 0% biological relationship to William Carmichael. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. There were medical records from 2013. Preston had needed a kidney transplant because of a genetic disorder. Dad had volunteered as a donor. The doctors told him he was not a match. Not just incompatible. Not just the wrong blood type. There was no genetic relationship at all. That was when he ordered the DNA test. There were also divorce papers. William Carmichael versus Diane Shaw Carmichael. Finalized September 2019. They had been legally divorced for 5 years, and no one had ever told me. No one had told Preston either. Then I found the letter. Dad's handwriting was shaky, uneven, written recently by a hand that had probably struggled to hold the pen. Ethan, I failed you. When your mother died, I was broken. Diane appeared 6 months later. Beautiful, charming. Exactly what a grieving widower needed to hear. I married her too quickly and believed her too easily. Preston was born a year later. I loved him. I raised him as my son. But when he needed that transplant in 2013, the doctors told me the truth. No biological match. Not even close. I ordered the DNA test. The results destroyed me. Diane had an affair. Preston was not mine, but I had raised him for 14 years. He called me Dad. How could I tell him his entire life was a lie? Then I had the stroke. 3 months after discovering the truth, the doctors said it was stress-induced. Diane took over everything. Power of attorney, medical decisions. She isolated me, controlled who visited, screened my calls. I tried to reach you. I called your number dozens of times. Every call was blocked. Every message was deleted. Diane made sure of it. I divorced her legally 5 years ago, but she never left the house. She said it would traumatize Preston. I was too weak to fight her, so I watched you from the shadows. I hired investigators. I kept the photos. I lived through your successes from a distance. You became everything I hoped you would be. Honest, hardworking, good. This will is my last chance to make things right, to give you what you deserve, to expose the truth. I am sorry I could not be stronger. I am sorry I let them push you out. I am sorry for everything. I love you, son. I always... The letter ended there, mid-sentence. He had died before finishing it. I sat in that study for 3 hours reading the documents again and again, staring at the photographs, trying to understand what I had found. Dad had known. For 12 years, he had known Preston was not his biological son, and still he had let me walk out of that house. Still he had let me believe I was the outsider. But there was the stroke, the power of attorney. Diane controlling everything. Calls blocked. Messages deleted. Access cut off. He had been trapped in his own house, surrounded by the people who had helped make me feel like a stranger. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. I looked up as Preston appeared in the doorway. He saw the photographs on the walls. Then he saw the folder in my hands. His face went white. "What is this?" he whispered. "The truth," I said. He stepped inside slowly, his eyes moving from photo to photo. Then to the DNA test, lying on the desk. He picked it up with shaking hands. He read it. His legs buckled, and he sat heavily in Dad's leather chair. "This is fake," he said. "It has to be fake." "It's from 2013, I said. "When you needed the kidney transplant, Dad volunteered as a donor. The doctors told him he wasn't a match. That's when he found out." Preston's face crumbled in a way I had never seen before. "He never said anything." "Because he loved you anyway," I said. "Because you called him Dad. Because telling you the truth would have destroyed you." Preston looked up at me. "Then why are you showing me this now?" "Because you demanded a DNA test," I said. "Because you stood in front of 32 people and called my legitimacy into question. Because you have spent your entire life making me feel like I didn't belong." I stood. And for the first time in my life, Preston looked smaller than me. "The results come back Friday. When Lawrence reads them, everyone is going to know." He stared at the papers in his hands. He was not angry. That would have been easier. He looked horrified, like the floor had disappeared beneath him and taken his entire identity with it. "Does Mom know?" he whispered. I nodded toward the folder. "Read the divorce papers. She's the reason the test exists." The will reading was scheduled for Friday morning, December 1st, at 10 a.m., in Lawrence Rothstein's office in downtown Boston. It was a corner suite on the 14th floor, with windows overlooking the common. leather chairs arranged around a mahogany desk, and law books lining the walls like silent witnesses. Diane sat center stage in a black street John suit, pearls at her throat, hair styled perfectly, but her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Preston sat beside her, though his chair was pulled about 6 inches away. He had not spoken to her since he found the study. I sat across from them. 3 other relatives filled the remaining seats, second cousins who barely knew Dad but had been named in the will for token amounts. Lawrence opened his briefcase. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Before we proceed with the reading of William Carmichael's will, there is a matter to address. He pulled out a sealed envelope from Gene Tech Labs. The room went silent. Mr. Carmichael added a clause to his will 2 years before his death, Lawrence said. The estate, valued at approximately $47 million, will be distributed solely to his biological children. All parties claiming inheritance were required to consent to DNA testing. Anyone who refused would forfeit their claim. He picked up a letter opener and sliced through the envelope. The results are as follows. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. Ethan Carmichael, Lawrence said, looking at me. Confirmed. 99.999% biological match to William Carmichael. I exhaled slowly. Relief moved through me so fast it almost hurt. For 18 years, they had made me doubt the one thing that should have been beyond question. In one sentence, the lie they had built around me collapsed. Diane let out a small breath too, but hers sounded different. It sounded like hope, like she still believed the second result might save her. Lawrence continued. Preston Carmichael. He paused. The silence stretched until it felt like another person in the room. Zero biological relationship to William Carmichael detected. Preston shot to his feet. That's impossible. There's been a mistake. He turned toward Diane so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Mom, tell them they're wrong. Tell them this is some kind of error. Diane sat frozen, the color draining from her face. Then she suddenly snapped. This is a setup, she shouted. Lawrence tampered with the results. This is fraud. I reached into the folder I had brought with me, pulled out the 12-year-old DNA test, and slid it across the desk. Then explain this, I said quietly. Dad already knew. He found out in 2013 when Preston needed a kidney transplant, and he volunteered as a donor. The doctors at Mass General told him there was no genetic match. That's when he ordered this test. I looked directly at Diane. 12 years. He knew for 12 years. He loved Preston anyway. Diane's voice cracked. He raised him. He called him his son. Mrs. Carmichael, Lawrence began, then paused. Or should I say, Miss Shaw, since your divorce from William Carmichael was finalized 5 years ago. You have no legal standing in this proceeding. Diane's face went from pale to gray. Preston stared at his mother. You were divorced? Preston, sweetie, she said, reaching for him. It was just paperwork. It didn't mean anything. You lied to me. His voice was barely a whisper. About everything. I was protecting you. Diane reached for his hand. He jerked away from her. Protecting me? His voice rose. You spent my whole life telling me Ethan was probably illegitimate. You made me treat him like garbage. You convinced me I was the real son and he was the fake. Then he turned to me. His eyes were wet. And the whole time it was me. Lawrence cleared his throat. There is more. Mr. Carmichael left a final letter. He wanted it read aloud in this setting. He pulled out the document and began reading Dad's words. The affair, the deception, the discovery during the transplant, the stroke, the power of attorney, Diane blocking access, the investigators, the surveillance photos, the divorce, the will as his final act to expose the truth and protect me. Hearing the letter read out loud was different from reading it alone in the study. Every sentence landed with weight. Every apology became evidence. Every confession pulled another thread from the life Diane had spent years weaving. When Lawrence finished, no one spoke. One of the cousins stood and left without a word. The other two followed. Then it was just me, Preston, Diane, and Lawrence in that office, surrounded by the ruins of a family that had never really been what it claimed to be. Preston sat with his head in his hands. I don't know who I am anymore. I looked at him. For most of my life, I had imagined what it would feel like to see Preston humbled. I thought it would feel like victory. It did not. It felt like watching someone bleed from a wound he had not known was there. You're Preston Shaw, I said quietly. That's who you've always been. But Dad raised you. He loved you, even after he knew. That part was real. He lifted his head slowly. Then why did he leave me out of the will? Because Diane used you as a weapon, I said. Because she poisoned you against me. Because he wanted the truth to come out, and money was the only way to force it. Preston turned back to Diane. Who is my real father? She did not answer. Who is he? His voice broke on the last word. Diane looked down. Marcus Bennett? She whispered. A colleague at the firm. It was a mistake. A one-time thing. Does he know? Preston asked. Silence. His face twisted. Does he know I exist? Diane's answer was barely audible. I told him I miscarried. Preston made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. So I'm nobody's son. William isn't my father. Marcus doesn't know I exist. And you? He looked at her with something close to hatred. You built my entire life on a lie. Lawrence folded his hands on the desk. The will is clear. The estate passes entirely to Ethan Carmichael. Preston Shaw receives nothing. Diane Shaw receives nothing. He turned to me. Mr. Carmichael, do you have any questions? I had 1,000, but only one came out. What about the house? It is yours, Lawrence said, along with all properties, investments, and assets. Total value, $47.3 million. Preston did not fight it. He did not hire lawyers. He did not contest the will. He just left. 3 days later, he moved out of the estate with 2 suitcases and his car. Diane tried to follow him. He told her that if she ever contacted him again, he would get a restraining order. I heard through Rosa that he moved to Portland and legally changed his name to Preston Shaw. He started over. Diane moved to Florida, Boca Raton. A condo, according to the little I heard. We have never spoken since that day in Lawrence's office. I am sitting in Dad's study now. The 3rd floor room with the photographs still on the walls. I had them framed. Not because surveillance is love. Not because distance can replace presence. But because they remind me that even when I thought I was completely alone, someone was watching. Someone cared. Someone was trying, in the limited, broken way he could, to stay connected to the son he had lost. The estate is being turned into a non-profit now. The Carmichael Foundation for Children Without Parents. Scholarships, housing assistance, therapy programs, support for kids who know what it means to grow up with grief in the room. I kept the house, but I do not live here. There are too many ghosts. I visit on weekends. I sit in this study. I read Dad's unfinished letter. I love you, son. I always what? Always knew? Always believed? Always hoped? I will never know the exact word he meant to write. But I know this. DNA does not make you family. Sacrifice does. Love does. Being there does. Choosing someone does. Preston spent 31 years being told he was William Carmichael's son, believing it, building his entire identity around it. I spent 18 years being told I was not. When the truth came out, we both lost something. But I gained something too. I gained proof that the man who raised me knew exactly who I was. He believed in me even from a distance. He left me everything, not because of blood alone, but because of choice, because of truth, because this was the only way he had left to fight for me. Last week, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was one sentence. Thank you for not destroying me worse than I destroyed myself. P. I folded it carefully and put it in the desk drawer beside Dad's unfinished letter. Maybe someday I will respond. But today, I am sitting here, looking at photographs of a man who loved me enough to fight for me in the only way he could, through the truth. Justice does not belong to blood. It belongs to the people who choose the truth when lies would be easier.